The Dogs of War are an unusual force in Warhammer, and in Total War Warhammer's world of doomstacks and other cheesy exploits, will require a substantial amount of calculated balancing to enable them to retain their unique themes and identity. In the past two videos we have discussed map placement, mechanics and legendary characters. Now in this, the final part of the Dogs of War series, we will look at the armies that will accompany these characters into battle and thereby fully realise the concept of the Dogs of War. The generic Lord and Hero choices are the Mercenary General and the Wizard Lord, with of course hero equivalents. Not much to be said here really, one's a melee character and the other is a spellcaster. The option to have Paymaster Lords too would be an interesting option, and for heroes we can expect the Mercenary Captain, the Hireling Wizard and the Paymaster. The latter though could be converted into an ancillary follower instead though, if CA are looking to simplify things. There are also in lore Truthsayers of Albion and Dark Emissaries of Albion, who are both spellcaster heroes, but they'd be outside bets for inclusion in my opinion, as they would have to come with their own lore and would only be likely to come to the Dogs of War if Albion and or Be'lakor come to the campaign map at some point too, as factions in their own right. The core units of the Dogs of War are mostly quite basic and represent a light shot and pike style faction, in keeping with their late medieval to Renaissance era Europe faction framework. However, they also have much more specialised units that can be used, as well as a massive array of Regiments of Renown. At the heart of the basic army we find Pikemen, who are exactly what they sound like. Armoured men with extremely long spears, who are almost impenetrable from the front, but extremely vulnerable at the rear and flanks. Expect them to have high melee defense, lower melee attack, and to be average in almost every other regard other than speed, which I would expect to be low. Crossbowmen are the core ranged unit for the Dogs of War, and there's very little to be said here because we've seen a lot of crossbowmen in this series, so we know what to expect. However, I would also expect to see an expansion of varieties of them in Warhammer 3 to fill out the roster and also better reflect the historical roots of the faction. With that in mind, I'd envision the addition of Pavis crossbowmen, carrying heavy shields on their back for protection that can then be deployed for frontal protection once stationary. I would like to see a buff given to the range and weapon strength of Dogs of War crossbowmen though, given that Tillians are famed for their ability with these weapons. Dualists are light skirmisher troops and would be armed with a sword, buckler and either a pistol or throwing knives. Because of that latter difference, we may get two varieties, with the throwing knife version having a faster rate of fire and potentially more damage but a shorter range. Think of Dualists as being akin to the Empire's Free Company militia, only hopefully not as lousy. Because of their higher levels of skill and reputation, they might also be classed as a kind of damage dealer unit, along the lines of Witch Elves. Heavy and light cavalry are exactly what you would expect them to be. The heavy cavalry are shock troops and good for line breaking and general violence, while the light cavalry are best employed for harassment, chasing down routing enemies and attacking light troops. Now when envisioning Dogs of War cannons, don't get carried away thinking of the massive powerhouse artillery of the Dwarfs and the Empire. Bear in mind that mercenaries are by their nature a mobile army, always on the move and ideally doing it quickly. So for their cannons, think of a lighter variety that has less range and does less damage overall, but compensates for those weaknesses with a quicker rate of fire to reflect their lighter shot, as well as more mobility on the battlefield for when you need to reposition them in a hurry. Obviously these are just the main core units, and CA will have some flexibility to add in thematically fitting sword units, skirmisher cavalry and such like to round out what would otherwise be an extremely bare bones core roster. This is where things get more exciting in terms of your armies, because the Dogs of War attract handy fighters from most of the Warhammer world, and as mercenaries they're happy to take anyone who is useful and reliable. Because of this, the potential is there to get some real variety into the Dogs of War roster, which would otherwise be, as you've seen, very bare bones. However, I expect a catch or two. Allowing unrestricted use of the units that I'm about to present here would likely result in single race armies and mono-unit doomstacks that would not fit in well at all with the variety and opportunism that marks the Dogs of War out from normal factions. With that in mind, I would expect these to be recruited along the lines of Ogre Mercenary pop-ups, a Raised Dead style regional recruitment mechanic as I discussed in a previous video, or something akin to Rickart's Monsters mechanic whereby you attract them after a battle and they go into a pool that you can recruit from at a price, but with limited numbers of the units in question, making these special options rather than the norm, which I think will be the theme with special units for the Dogs of War. Mercenary Dwarfs had a lot of flexibility on tabletop with the option to have shields, great weapons and crossbows, so it's possible that we could see basic dwarf warriors, great weapon dwarfs and also quarrelers, possibly even rangers available to the Dogs of War. These will add some serious durability to a faction that otherwise seems to lack it, and the recruitment mechanics that I've proposed would give them the kind of scarcity that would stop you from just overpowering and overloading your army with units from what are otherwise a completely separate race. Mercenary Ogres too will add something extra to the Dogs of War roster, giving monstrous infantry and the kind of raw punching power that you just don't get from Pikemen and Dualists. On tabletop these could come with dual weapons and great weapons, while regional and situation recruitment could also see the addition of more specialised ogre units as we've seen in Warhammer 3 so far, albeit probably in very limited numbers. Norse Marauders are a natural fit for the Dogs of War, being a hardy folk and skilled warriors who like to earn their pay through prolific outbursts of extreme violence. Obviously there are multiple varieties of those available, with varying degrees of usefulness. Paymaster's Bodyguard are an elite halberd unit and on tabletop accompanied the Paymaster hero. Now that's a difficult combination to make work in Total War Warhammer, but it's possible that these may make it into the roster to round the Dogs of War out with a flexible anti-large unit. Mercenary Giants are a likely inclusion as there is a Regiment of Renown for the Dogs of War called the Giants of Albion that is led by Hengist the Druid. However, having a whole unit made up of giants would be a poor fit for Total War Warhammer. So I would instead expect Mercenary Giants of Albion to be recruitable individually, with one or two of the more famous named ones available as Regiments of Renown. Last up we have two outsider units to make it in, largely because CA have seemed very resistant to having their base race in the game, and I'm talking about the Halflings and the Halfling Hot Pot. For Halflings, think of hobbits and you won't go too far wrong. They could be given decent proficiency as range units, but being short makes them slow, and coupled with their comparative weakness in melee, that essentially renders them a bad substitute for dwarfs. If they make it in at all, it'll be as cheap fodder. And the Hot Pot is basically a catapult that fires soup, so it's honestly more of a meme than a weapon, and I don't really expect this to make it in, nor indeed the Halflings themselves, but it would be remiss for me to not mention them here, as they were a feature of Dogs of War armies. Don't be confused by the term Regiments of Renown here. While in Total War that's become a term for elite units associated with almost every faction, in original Warhammer terms it's a term for renowned mercenaries, and it's actually more or less interchangeable with the Dogs of War name itself. There are a lot of these units associated with the Dogs, and I'm expecting some to be acquired via levelling up your Lord in the usual Total War Warhammer fashion, while others will be unlocked in some other way. Be it quest battles, being approached to recruit them after reaching a level of notoriety, or campaign map highlight pop-ups like Ogre Mercenaries or Imric's Dragons, in which you would be required to help them out in some kind of battle to earn their services. Indeed, with this many units available, there are potentially enough there for it to turn out to be a mix of all of these recruitment styles. Being as we have a lot of these to go through, I'm not going to go into great detail about each unit or their captains, but rather stick to telling you what they are and what they can do. We're going to start with Lumping Krups Fighting Cocks, simply because as a halfling unit, these may be omitted. Hopefully not though, as they could be a lot of fun. They are lightly armoured and carry bow and sword. Being halflings, they won't hold up brilliantly in melee, but their skill with a bow and diminutive size could make them a stalking ranged unit, albeit quite a slow one. Al-Mukhtar's Desert Dogs are light cavalry led by, of course, Al-Mukhtar, which means Chosen One, and whose birth name was Werner Gluck. Expect them to be much stronger light cavalry than is normally found in Total War Warhammer, carrying scimitar and shield. These might fall afoul of Creative Assembly's aversion to including Araby in the game, but I hope not, as they'll be a superb addition to any Dogs of War army. The Alcatani Fellowship are a Tillian pike unit led by Rodrigo del Monte. They're lightly armoured pikemen, so don't expect them to be very exciting, but do expect them to be better than normal pike recruits of the Dogs of War. I'd expect this to be one of those Regiments of Renown that you unlock just by levelling up your Lord, because they're kind of basic. Asaniel the Dragonlord has already been mentioned in the series, as he's a contender to be a Lord or a hero, but if he's instead used as normal as a Regiment of Renown, I expect him to be a single monstrous entity on his huge dragon mount, and to be one of the toughest Regiments of Renown to attract to your faction. The Men of Ursula are a unit of Norscan warriors led by Bjorg Bearstruck, who is literally a werebear, which sounds like a care bear, only I can tell you he definitely doesn't care, he kills. Mixed units are quite unusual in Total War Warhammer, so I would not be surprised to see Bjorg either appear as a single monstrous entity, or for the idea of werebear and bearmen to be combined into a monstrous infantry unit similar to skinwolves. The Birdmen of Katratza are probably the hardest regiment to implement, but also one of the most fun if CA can manage it, because they'll add another aerial unit. These guys are glider-mounted crossbowmen led by an inventor named Dadalo. The difficulty in creating glider units lies in the fact that they aren't truly flyers, so they would need something that explains their ability to land and take off again in battle without any height available to jump from. However, with a little tweaking to their wingsuits, it may still be able to make sense of them, which would be good because they'll be a lot of fun. Braganza's Besiegers are a Pavis crossbow unit, so essentially well-armoured and shielded elite crossbowmen who can defend themselves reasonably well in melee, as well as easily parry ranged counterfire. I would expect these to be another one that you unlock by levelling up your Lord. Bronzino's Galloper Guns are wagon-mounted cannons taken from Tilian galleys to be used on the field. Think war wagons, only with real punch but without the 360 range of fire, and you'll get the idea here. Fast and with reasonable range and power, but logically speaking I expect them to be limited to firing behind themselves. Bollogs and Kashtor are two of the largest of the giants of Albion, and best suited to being Regiments of Renown. Now we know what to expect with giants: big, slow, hit hard, get shot easily. These two will be tankier, and Kashtor could actually add something a bit more interesting to the Dogs of War. One of the main stories for him involves him fighting evil giants by hurling rocks at them in a confrontation that lasted for hundreds of years, so Kashtor could actually serve as a rock-throwing artillery monster, very much like a Beastman Cygor. Golgfag's Man-Eaters are a unit of ogre mercenaries with a storied history and great reputation. They've looted settlements on Ulthuan and around Skavenblight, and their captain Golgfag has been honoured personally by Emperor Karl Franz. Truly elite monstrous infantry and extremely durable. These are certain to make an appearance, and you'll definitely want to get them when you can. The Cursed Company are skeleton warriors in light armour with sword and shield. They served under a necromancer in a rebellion against the Empire. However, when their captain took a bribe from the Empire to turn on and kill the necromancer, they were cursed and died with him, rising the next night as skeletons. One of the lore features of this unit is that their victims always rise from the dead to fight alongside them. This, I feel, would be well reflected in the unit always getting full replenishment if they manage to make it through a battle without getting wiped out. Leopold's Leopard Company are another unit of Tilian pikemen. Elite and with fancy outfits, but not very exciting really. I wouldn't even be surprised if CA changed their armament type to something other than pikes, just to diversify the roster a little. Longdrong Slayer pirates are a lot more exciting and exactly what they sound like: unbreakable dwarf pirates. If that doesn't sound like a fun unit to field, you're hopelessly jaded and should consider maybe returning to Call of Duty. To fit the pirate theme, these should be a hybrid unit, with pistols, cutlasses, and a serious attitude. Think of Kislevite armoured Kossars, only shorter and a lot cooler. Malachi Mackison's Goblin Hewer is an artillery piece crewed by dwarf slayers. It fires axes at the enemy, so expect it to blast multiple projectiles out per shot and to be blisteringly powerful against infantry and cavalry, but probably not great against single entities or other artillery. Also, the crew will be unbreakable, so they'll keep firing until they get taken out. The Marksmen of Miragliano are a famous unit of Tilian crossbowmen who've served in Kislev, the World's Edge Mountains and beyond. Crossbows are very useful, but they're not especially exciting, so I'd expect these to be relatively easy to unlock, but to also have substantially better range and missile strength than normal crossbowmen. Mengil Manhide's Manflayers are an elite force of sadistic dark elves whose captain at one time led raids from the famous Black Ark, the Citadel of Spite. Now he and his men sell their services to the highest bidder and are one of the most feared mercenary units in the Warhammer world. They carry great swords and repeater crossbows, so the natural fit in Total War Warhammer is for them to be mercenary shades with great swords. They should also cause terror because of their penchant for torture and eating the flesh of their victims. The Nightmare Legion, also known as the Doomed Legion, are another unit of skeleton warriors who in life were a famous mercenary company in Tilia before being betrayed by their patron, the Duke of Lambrusco. Years after they were killed, they flooded down from the Appuccini Mountains, still led by their deceased captain Mordini. They destroyed the entire city of Lambrusco, tortured the treacherous Duke Fabiano to death, and now sell their services to the highest bidder. They're undead skeletons, so will work under the same battlefield rules as similar units do for the vampire counts, only these should have much higher melee skills and leadership. Ogla Khan's Wolf Boys are wolf-riding hobgoblins from the eastern steppes. We've all played with Goblin Wolf Riders, so we know mostly what to expect here. These will be a hybrid melee and ranged unit with powerful bows for ranged combat, but also scimitars for when the fight goes hand to hand. They'll hold up better than their greenskin equivalents though, especially because they have good armour. Next up we have Pizarro's Lost Legion, who are a hybrid pike unit who hail from Tabaro and are also equipped with crossbows, making them literally pike and shot at the same time. Because the animations involved in switching from crossbow to pike and vice versa will probably be quite clunky and take a relatively long time in game, I think it likely that they will keep the crossbows but swap the pikes for either swords or spears. Either way, they'll be a useful hybrid unit. Rico's Republican Guard are another Tilian pike unit. Not much to say about these. Long spears, heavy armour, very little excitement. Not one that you're going to go out of your way to get, I'd say. Ruglud's Armoured Orcs are more exciting because, well, they're armoured orcs led by the eponymous and notoriously stupid Ruglud. They wear ill-fitting dwarven armour and carry weapons stolen from a dwarf hold. This will be a tough melee unit and a substantial step up from normal Orc Boys units, possibly approaching Black Orc levels of skill and durability. The next regiment are Titchy Witchy's Raiders, and God almighty, Games Workshop must have had someone in their ranks in the 80s who absolutely hates lizardmen, because so many of their characters have bloody stupid names. Tehenuin, aka Teeny Weeny, I'm looking at you. Now these are skink Cold One cavalry and have some fun lore, involving raiding the Tomb Kings with Arabians and hunting orcs with the dwarfs of Barak Var. Ultimately, they're large lizards riding small dinosaurs, so why wouldn't you want that in your army? Vespero's Vendetta are a unit of dualists equipped with dual hand weapons and throwing knives. These I would expect to be the classic fast damage dealer infantry unit, with very high melee skills and a short ranged attack for their throwing knives that will do good damage but have low ammo. And finally we have Volun's Venators. This elite band of mercenary cavalry are truly exceptional and considered to be superior in skill to the best knights of the Empire, and even perhaps those of Bretonnia. They will be extremely powerful shock cavalry, with heavy armour, shield lance, and the turning circle of a speeding train, but just as much damage potential on impact. Those are the units that you can expect for a Dogs of War faction, and as you've seen, they range from the dreary to the dreamy, with basic infantrymen, cavalry, elite soldiers, all the way through to monsters, machines and representatives from almost every faction in the Warhammer world. They offer a chance to field wildly varied and fun armies, and to roleplay in a style that even the ogres don't truly bring to the table, so for me they're an absolute must-have in Total War Warhammer 3. If not in the form of a full DLC, then in an updated port of Kataf's superb Southern Realms mod, with new Warhammer 3 mechanics added. But what do you think? Are you excited by the prospect of playing as the Dogs of War? Which elite units would you go hunting for first? Would you play them as roaming mercenaries, or would you stick to traditional conquest play? Whatever your thoughts are, stick them in the comments section to keep the discussion going, hit subscribe and the bell icon, and I'll see you soon with another video. I hope you've enjoyed the guide.